Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. Today's a beautiful day in Wisconsin. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. I want to give a shout out to my donors, which I've been doing recently. So today I'm going to shout out to Rhonda. Thank you, Rhonda, so much for your donations. You've given a couple times, and I so appreciate your support of this podcast, Prayer and Retreat Ministry. Also want to remind everyone of the Whole Planet Spirituality Forum and Retreat at Unity Village, October 19th through 22nd. And there's going to be lots of amazing speakers and workshops, fabulous plant-based food, wonderful people who are on all spectrums of the path of spirituality. We will be talking about being in alignment with our values and our actions and our thoughts and our feelings so that we really can experience inner peace and be peacemakers in the world. And part of that includes how we look at the planet and all of the fellow creatures on our planet. So it doesn't matter where you are, if you're a vegan, if you're a vegetarian, if you're a curious omnivore, if you just want to learn a little bit about living a vegan lifestyle, no one's going to pressure you, but it is a great place to feel the love and learn about what it's like to live in alignment with our planet. So that's my run up. If you are on YouTube, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. Also on my podcast, rate and review, all that good stuff that helps this podcast stay a top rated spiritual podcast. Let me introduce my guest today. Dianne Waltner grew up in rural Kansas where her Mennonite family ran a poultry hatchery. An introverted, highly sensitive child who was bullied and ostracized at her small school, Dianne always felt a sense of solidarity with the underdog, which ultimately led her to challenge the paradigm she was raised in. Her journey through cognitive dissonance, feelings of loss and rejection, depression, self-medication with alcohol, and her ultimate redemption is told in her book, Evolving Into Wholeness, A Journey of Compassion. Through her spiritual journey of self-discovery and its unavoidable companions, pain, courage, and dark nights of the soul, Dianne ultimately chose to align her life with her deeply held values of compassion for all. Recently, Dianne became an ordained animal chaplain, and she is also a Main Street Vegan Academy coach and certified coach and educator. And Dianne is committed to creating a better world for human and non-human animals alike. Welcome, Dianne.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's such an honor to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. I really am. I think we're going to have just a really interesting conversation, very different than other conversations that I've had with people. And as I said before we got on the air here, that every person's journey is really interesting. Everyone's is unique. And I know that your story will bless people who are listening or watching on YouTube. So speaking of your story, I want you to fill up in any gaps that you want to fill in about your story. I know I kind of brushed over that your family ran a poultry hatchery, and I know there was just a lot that went into your working there and the experience that you had there as you kind of awakened to the fact that you love all beings and that you're doing these things to these other beings. And I think that was kind of a big part of your journey. So you want to talk a little bit about your spiritual journey?
Yeah, sure. And as you mentioned, I grew up in a Mennonite community. I grew up in a farm just in the central Kansas. We were regular churchgoers, and there are still a lot of things that I value about the Mennonite faith. I always appreciated the pacifism, the simple living, and a variety of things. But there always seemed to be somewhat of a disconnect because, we talked about nonviolence and pacifism, but that didn't extend beyond the humanity, beyond the human race. And so when I was in high school, I read a couple of books that were really pivotal in my life. One was Mankind, Our Incredible War on Wildlife, and another one was America's Last Wild Horses by Hope Ryden. And from the Mankind by Cleveland Amory, I became very upset with the fur industry, and after learning about that, and it always bothered me. We had hunters on our land, and Dad would usually allow it, but we'd be out there and listening to them shoot, and that always bothered me. And I just felt I felt more of a connection with the wild animals, but then I'd go and work at the hatchery and do something. So there was a lot of like you said, a lot of cognitive dissonance. But the book that really started me on my spiritual journey, which included including animals, was America's Last Wild Horses, because I was really upset by and angry about the fact that wild horses were being rounded up and sent to slaughter for humans. And one night at supper, I just mentioned this to my family. I said, isn't that terrible that they're killing horses for human consumption? And Dad just asked me the question, what's the difference between eating a horse and a cow? And, in my mind, I tried to rationalize it and say that, horses are pets, and cows are just here for us to eat. That's their purpose. That's why God gave them to us. But it never really set right with me. It just didn't seem right that a loving God would create animals just to be killed. So that kind of tried to ignore that and continue on, because I did spend a lot of time at the hatchery. Before I was old enough to work there, we go there, and I loved hatch days because all the baby chickens, and we hatched chickens and turkeys. All the baby chicks and the baby turkeys were so cute, and so we'd play with them. And I remember holding the chicks in my hand and just petting their heads and just watching them close their eyes and go to sleep. And I just loved that. And then it would be time to go and go. And then as I got older and I started working there, it's kind of surprising to think of how quickly we can become desensitized to the suffering in the world and to what we're doing, the suffering that we're causing. Because, as I started in, we did a lot of things at the hatchery. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I did do a lot of, I witnessed a lot of debeaking, de-winging, and I did a lot of detowing and desnooting myself. And it was hard at first, but you kind of numb that. You kind of numb those feelings. You kind of suppress that because you have to keep going. And these were good people. My parents were wonderful people. I knew they loved me dearly, and I couldn't imagine better parents. And good people don't do bad things, so this must just be something that we have to do. This is just a necessary, unfortunate, but necessary part of life. And for some reason, I still couldn't quite figure out how God condoned this, but it must be. He must be. I still had the impression of God as the old man in the cloud. My views have certainly evolved a lot since then, but at the time, that's kind of what I thought. So it must be the way that he thought it was going to be. Fast forward about 10 or 12 years after I was out of college, and I got involved with an animal with an animal rights group, and they were protesting furs. And since I'd been long against furs, I really felt comfortable joining them and being a part of that. And that kind of cemented my feelings that I had about fur and then I also met some vegetarians and people who were thinking about going vegetarian. And, I didn't really want to think about it, but I still couldn't. I still kept coming back to that question that Dad asked, because I would never knowingly eat a horse. So why is it okay for me to eat cows and other things? So eventually at about 30, and I seem to go in kind of 10-year periods. So about 30, I went vegetarian. I was also smoking a lot and drinking a lot. At 40, I quit smoking. At 50, I went vegan, and at 60, I quit drinking. So it's like every decade I has some major life change. But along with that change to the transformation to vegetarian, I also it was a tremendous spiritual awakening as well. It was extremely difficult. I did, as you mentioned, I did spend many dark nights of the soul, to the point that I just didn't know what to do. I didn't feel like I could keep doing what I was doing, but I felt like, the only people who had shown me love and compassion that I knew that I could count on, my family. I didn't want, it felt like a rejection of them, because I was rejecting their whole way of life and our whole way of life. And so it was extremely difficult, but it was so spiritually liberating once I finally made that decision that I was not going to eat animals anymore. So it was very painful. And so I understand how difficult and why it can be difficult for people to make that change, make that choice. But in the end, and then I kind of went through the same thing. It took me a long time. It took me about another 20 years to finally give up all animal products, because I still, I still like to think that, that we needed them. And I was one of those who was addicted to cheese. So that was really hard for me to give up. And I thought, well, I'm still supporting the family industry because I'm still eating eggs. So I'm not totally rejecting my family. And I had relatives who had dairy farms. And as dairy farms go, they couldn't have been any more humane. The cows were on pasture. They had names. They were called. They were loved as much as dairy cows could be loved. But actually, one of my relatives commented to me just a few years ago about how hard it was when she had to send them to slaughter. Mm. Finally, it made the connection that dairy cows, there's no retirement homes for dairy cows. They go to slaughter just like every other animal for meat. So once I finally made that connection, then I realized that I could not be a part of that anymore. So that was, oh, yes.
Yeah, so I'd like to interject just a little bit before you go on, because there's a lot in what you said. And I think that what I loved about your story is it helped me understand why this is so hard for so many people. And it's really just not about changing what you eat. It's a whole psycho-spiritual thing. It's massive. And in your case, you had wonderful parents and they were role models and you loved them and they were loving people. And so there's this kind of disconnect about what they're doing. You can't condemn what they're doing because you love them and they love you. I think this is what happens with children. I think all of us become indoctrinated into a system of violence that's accepted. And because our parents are doing this, then, if I go against that, I feel like I'm cutting myself off from my source of love. And this is the trauma that children experience when they undergo abuse, but also when they're faced with these, do I do what my parents do or do I go against them? And how does that feel? I remember once myself that I was going through some old family pictures And I adored my dad, and I had great parents too. I saw a picture of my father as a young man holding a pheasant. I mean, it was after hunting. He was not a hunter. As far as I know, he never hunted. But apparently, at one point in time in his life, his work buddies invited him out. And when I saw that, I took the picture out of the album and I hid it. I put it away. I was not going to think of my father in those terms. My father wouldn't do that. And there it was. And I just felt quiet desperation around that. I too was a sensitive child like you about animals and well, all life. And I think most children are sensitive about life. I think that we're just trained at various rates to desensitize ourselves. But anyway, so I really felt your pain reading your book about that. How do I kind of declare myself when my family has completely different values? And it probably would have been more helpful if they weren't a good family and you could rebel. But I think that I think that this, you said it felt like that you were rejecting your family. And I just think that's just a fascinating thing to try to overcome, because I think the whole spiritual path is about becoming you. It's about becoming you. It's about becoming ourselves, not about just carrying on the patterning of conditioning and carrying on the pattern of our parenting. So, this was your struggle. And I think that the cognitive dissonance, which if people don't know what that means, that's when you have inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes, and it's not like your beliefs aren't in line with your actions. And most of us are living this way, whether it's about animals or about child labor or any number of issues, war, government, politics, medicine, any number of issues. But you walked through that and still were able to make your own decisions. I'm going to let you pick up and say what the next chapter is.
Well, and yes, like you said, I've often thought it would have been a lot easier if my parents would have been jerks, if they would have
Right.
said, okay, they're bad people, they're doing bad things, I don't need to be a part of this.
Yeah, we live in a world where good people do bad things or do things that are really mean. We live in that world.
Right, right. And that's, yeah, like you said, that was really hard to reconcile. But I realize that we've all been indoctrinated into this system and to believe that's, when I was growing up, we had the 4 food groups and half of that was animal products. You had to have that to be healthy. So, anyway, after, I kind of lost my train of thought.
That's okay. That's okay. You lost your train of thought. There's one more thing I wanted to point out, because the story that you tell about holding the little chicks and the little poults, the little babies, I think that is, so you're at a hatchery, and I think that is such a beautiful example of the child, the inner child that we all have. Our inner child wants to hold the chick. Our inner child does not want to snap its neck. It does not want to slash its throat. It does not want to clip its wings. Our inner child wants to hold the baby chick. And that journey to returning to, or allowing that child within us to arise, so that our compassion for beings can overcome all of this cultural conditioning. I think that is the spiritual path. We restore ourselves back to that child that wants to hold the chick. So I love that you also brought that into your story. So I think where you left off is probably like when you were in college and with the vegetarians, meeting vegetarians and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, so it was good to actually meet other people. I mean, now that I was away from home and I wasn't working at the hatchery anymore, so I could kind of put that aside. But it was nice meeting. I actually met people who were, like I said, vegetarians or in the process of becoming. So it felt like I was finding a new community finding a new, even though I never wanted to reject my parents. And I have to say that, and especially considering some of my other friends' experience when they went vegetarian, that my family was surprisingly supportive. I think, my dad didn't understand it, but mom was always, I mean, when I'd go home, she'd always fix vegetarian food for me. I mean, she would always, and she told me once that, it really wouldn't be hard for her to be vegetarian. But it was just, that was just not our culture, but that was really good. But throughout all of this, I had started smoking and drinking, and drinking became an important, I mean, throughout this, drinking was was my main method of coping with a lot of things. So it was my go-to. If it was a bad day, drink to forget. If it was a good day, drink to celebrate. It was, it was kind of like cheese. There was always alcohol in the fridge. There was always wine or beer and cheese in the fridge until I finally, it kind of, when I finally decided, I finally decided that I cared enough about myself that I wanted to quit smoking. I was having some health issues, health concerns. And so I decided that I would go with my mom and some relatives on a bus trip to get away from the smoking. So I did manage to do that, which was really challenging. But I finally started caring enough about myself to quit smoking. And then as I went on, then down the road, I also started caring. It's not willpower. It takes self-compassion more than willpower. And especially when I quit drinking at 60, it wasn't willpower. It was that I finally started caring enough and feeling connected and feeling spiritual, connected with the divine, and feeling spiritually, feeling spiritual enough that I cared about my life.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a huge step.
Yeah, a lot of times when I wasn't actively suicidal, which I was periodically, but a lot of times I didn't care if I lived or died.
Yeah, and that was deeply ingrained from childhood. So this is a really, really great story of the spiritual path, because it's a path of awareness, it's a path of individuating, but ultimately it's a path of loving yourself. Ultimately, it's a path of loving yourself enough to become who you were meant to be on this planet. And it sounds like that took also some experience of the divine, God, whatever it is we want to call that energy under all that is, and the great creator, whatever we want to call it, that some sort of relationship or understanding of that, I think, helped you along your path. But I love what you say, that it wasn't about willpower. That's so interesting to me, that it's about self-love, self-compassion, self-care. And how interesting is that? Which really, what you ended up doing is letting go of habits that weren't healthy, and letting go of habits that weren't consistent with your values. And we would think that would be an easy thing to do. It's just easy. I mean, like, this is not good for me. Let it go, But it is such an arduous journey, because it's entwined with so much sense of ourselves and our friends and our social environment and our families and all of that. So ultimately, you're saying it's self-compassion. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, because without without that, I would not have, I would not have quit drinking, because um, it was just that was as hard to think about, not having a going for a week. I couldn't imagine going for a week without a drink, even 2 or 3 days. But then the more I learned about it, and realized how harmful it was, and I finally decided, and I don't know that I would have quit drinking if I wouldn't have gone vegan, because after going vegan, I did start to feel more of the oneness and more of the connection with all life and with the divine, and how I valued other lives, and I started valuing myself.
Mm,
So
interesting. So yeah, so it sounds like your step to kind of be in action in the world that was aligned with your values, which was, compassion for all beings, that deepened your spirituality, and that deepened your sense of self, and yet deepened your sense of the divine. How interesting. Yes, it is the spiritual path.
yes, very much so. And I continue on that. I've experimented with a lot of things. Like I say, I still value a lot of the things that I grew up with as a Mennonite, but I still and I've been I've been drawn to a variety of faith traditions. I was going to theosophical meetings for a while. And when I started going back to church, I was drawn to the Unitarian Universalism, and I still, and then unity, for the same reasons, because they're both more eclectic. They take from a lot of different faith traditions. It's not one particular. So I found a lot of comfort and a lot of good things in those, and especially in unity. The Unitarian, I was very active with the Unitarian Church for a number of years, and was really grateful for everything that I learned there. But I was really drawn to unity because of the spiritual emphasis. The Unitarian Church that I attended was more into humanism, which
Mm-hmm.
I can understand, but I really valued the spiritual emphasis of unity.
At the time when you were getting to know what unity was all about, did you know about the founders and how Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were not only were they just ethical vegetarians, but Charles is very vocal about, if we're going to be peaceful people, we cannot keep killing animals. And if we want to develop spiritually, part of it is letting the animals on our plates go, stopping that. He didn't make people do these things, but he definitely spoke pretty clearly about that. Did you know about that, about unity, when you started Unity?
Not initially, because I had, when I was thinking about going back to church, I debated between Unitarian and Unitarian Universalism and unity. And at the time that I started with Unitarian, but then after I got a little disillusioned with that, then I decided to check out unity. So I didn't find out, and then when I found out later that the Fillmores were ethical vegetarians, that just made me even more inclined to be a part of unity.
Yeah. Now, Unity overall, I do this retreat at Unity Village to try to resurrect and reignite these teachings in Unity, but Unity overall has kind of fallen away from that. But I, like everything, we're all on a path when it comes to this. But I do think the Fillmores were right in that this is part of the spiritual path. This is part of the spiritual path. If we want to say we're nonviolent, we've got to be nonviolent. If we want to say we're loving, we've got to be loving. And that has to be loving and nonviolent towards everything out there, people, animals, all of life, everything in here, myself, not being violent towards myself, which I think your alcohol was, and smoking was violent towards yourself, and being loving towards yourself. So, and that is the spiritual path. They're aligned.
It's and once it's an ethical choice, it's not that difficult, because you gain so much. Well, with veganism, I gained a whole new world of food experiences. There is so much more out there, so many options that I wasn't even aware of, because I was stuck in the usual, meat, potatoes kind of routine. But going beyond, when you take that away and look for the new things, it's amazing, all of the variety. I mean, I gained so much, as far as, just, I'm kind of a, I enjoy food. I've always loved eating, and I love eating even more because the food is even so much better. And uh, the thing, well, in the same kind of, in the same kind of way with alcohol, it's like, well, first of all, when you say that you don't drink, people maybe assume, well, you must have a problem. Are you are you an alcoholic? What happened to you? Fortunately, I don't experience too much problems with that, because most of the people that I associate with are not heavy drinkers, and the people that my quote unquote drinking buddies, sadly, are either deceased or in a nursing home with dementia.
Mm.
So I'm not around, drinking all that much, but it is totally. I mean, once I stopped drinking, I realized how much time I had spent even just thinking about drinking. Like, okay, how much wine do I have in the fridge? Do I need to go to the liquor store? Do I need, I mean, just the thinking about it, just all of the trips to the liquor store, and then trying to, go to find different liquor stores, because I got embarrassed to be going to the same one all the time. So I didn't want to give the impression that I was drinking that much. So I mean, all the time that was freed up just from, and the mental energy. And again, the mental energy, both, I found so many comparisons between quitting drinking and quitting animal products. But the freedom from the guilt, I mean, the liberate, it was kind of, they were both liberation experiences. Freedom from the guilt of doing something that I didn't feel to be right, and for me and for the animals. And so it just opened up whole new worlds, both of food and of time, and of never, even though I didn't always have hangovers, it was freeing from those times when I did have hangovers, which when I first started drinking, I did have a lot of experiences, and that could have ended up a lot worse. I'm lucky that I never got a DUI. I'm lucky that I never was injured by some of the strangers that I allowed into my home after a night of drinking. So to be free of all of that worry and to be free of the guilt, was just wonderful. And it's like I say, it's saying, we think of all the things that we're saying no to, but what we're really saying is saying yes to life, to our life and to other lives. We're saying yes to compassion for ourselves and for others. We're saying yes to freedom for ourselves and for others. So it's really a joyful way to live.
Yeah, and I would think also with the alcohol, since that was something that you were using to kind of anesthetize yourself, you were also free to feel your feelings and free to be present, so it's like not having to cover all of that up. Like you vulnerably expose yourself to the feelings and the reality, and and allow that to rise. So that's the healing part. That's the spiritual healing. So that's a huge thing to gain. So I think it's interesting how you stated that people have a propensity to say what I would be missing. Oh, what I would be missing. And we're addicted to so many things that aren't good for us, but boy, we don't want to miss out. We don't want to miss out on the festivities. We don't want to miss out on being with friends. We don't miss out. But when we're on a path that aligns us spiritually, when our spiritual path, then and I think at some point you must have just committed yourself to that, because then the kind of world kind of opens up, and it's an expanding, abundant world, new foods, new realities, new peace, new love.
And new friendships too. I have to say, I've made some really, I've found community and found a lot of people, meeting people of similar mind and interests.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's so important. It's important for everybody to find community. And I think that was one of the things that was really disturbing about the COVID years, because it's like, where's my community? People kind of got lost a little bit with the lockdowns and whatnot. But on the spiritual path, it's very important to have, well, it's important for everyone to be in community, but if you're on the spiritual path, it's important to have the spiritual conversation around you, and people that kind of help hold you accountable, if not necessarily overtly, but by your friendship and how you want to show up.
Right, and just having other vegans too. I mean, veganism, which is definitely a part of my spiritual path, but it would be it's much more difficult when you're trying to go against the cultural norms by yourself. It's so nice to have friends with you on that journey as well.
Yeah, people who see that are in the same reality paradigm, who've made, yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about your animal chaplaincy. That you were just ordained as an animal chaplain. I'd love to hear about that program and what that means and what you might do with it, and if anybody's interested in becoming an animal chaplain, what they should do.
Yes, I'd love to talk about that. It was through the Compassion Consortium, which was co-founded by Victoria Moran and William Melton and Sarah Bowen, Reverend Sarah Bowen. She was Reverend Sarah was the director for the chaplaincy program, and it was amazing. It was it covered a lot of territory. We talked about a lot of different things, and I will probably for the rest of the year continue reading on some of the optional books that we covered. It's basically, well, kind of the tagline is healing human hearts, honoring animal lives.
Oh, wow. And how long is the program?
It is 3, 6, or 9 months. There's just an introductory program, and you can start out with one and you can continue if you decide that you want to go on. 3-month program is kind of an introductory program. The 6-month is a certificate program. And then if you want the full ordination, it's 9 months. And it will be starting again, I believe, in September. And to find out more, to get more specific details on that and about the upcoming program, it's under compassionconsortium.org, and it's under training.
Yeah, and I'll have that link on these show notes. So you went through the 9-month program, and so out of that, there was an ordination, and you are now an ordained animal chaplain. And I'm interested in the kinds of people who were in this program, and what you might do with it, and also what others might be doing as animal chaplains.
There were quite a variety of people in the program. There were some people who were already clergy or social workers or therapists. There were a lot of people in rescue. There were some, like us, there were some activists. So there was quite a variety of people who took it. I have to say, I admit, at first I was kind of surprised that not everybody in the program was vegan, but like I say, it was there was a lot of interest from a wide range of people, and so because of that, there are a lot of different things that people are doing with it. What I have been starting out with is contacting veterinarians and offering my services for their clients, as well as for the staff, for support for people either dealing with the euthanasia decision and support before, during, and after, helping deal with grief and finding ways to memorialize their animal companion and rituals, helping them develop rituals. So that's kind of what I've been starting as. I also plan on, the minister at Unity has asked me, she said that she wants to work with me on developing a Blessing of the Animal service in October. So I'm also looking at doing some things at the church. I plan on doing a study group on some of the Fillmore's teachings and on your booklet about animals. So that's a few of the things that I want to do. There's some other classes that I also want to take. I'm interested in the Shelter Animal Reiki Association has some classes, so I would like to take that and do some work directly with animals as well, which is, some people are working mostly with animals and not so much with humans. So that's another option. Then there's another course that I hope to take this fall on becoming a certified animal companion end-of-life doula.
Mm.
So there's a lot of opportunities for continuing education. The Compassion Consortium is also offering kind of another an advanced course in chaplaincy that I'm considering. So there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of opportunities. I'm getting a lot of interest. People are generally interested in the animal chaplaincy and what that involves, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. Because even though it's still, I mean, people are much more open to it than they used to be. Because back in the day when I was in college, I was briefly in the master's program in counseling with the intent on specializing in pet loss counseling. But this was back in the 1980s, and people were not, it was not as well known or as well received as it is today, as far as the human animal bond, which is something else that is a big part of this program, working to strengthen the human animal bond and helping animals thrive.
Mm-hmm.
While they're alive, as well as helping them with the sacred send-off.
Okay, interesting. So as an animal chaplain, you can minister to the animals and you can minister to the humans and you can minister to the bond between animals and humans. And there's lots of different ways to express that. I do know that loss of our companion animals, some people suffer horrendously when they lose their animal companion, and the world doesn't always understand that, and they're like, you can get another dog, you can get another cat or rabbit or whatever it is, but it is a real loss. I think the animals I think the animals are our teachers. I think they kind of show up in the world to show us how to live, and just being able to connect with what it is that they're saying to us. And I know we're not talking about animal communication, but that bond between us and the animal world, I think it's an original bond. I think it's one of the reasons we're living in kind of a traumatic state, because we've broken it in so many different ways. So before I go on, an idea that came to me while you were talking, I know that Renee King Sonnen, who is going to be the keynote speaker at the retreat, she's doing work with chicken farmers who have chosen to convert their chicken farms to mushroom farms. And I think there's a lot of farmers, I shouldn't say there's a lot, there are farmers, Howard Lyman's one, there's a pig farmer's another, there's a bunch of farmers out there who have kind of awakened to, I don't want to keep doing this anymore to my animals. Like I do bond with them. Either you cut off the bond and you mechanize the whole process, so you don't have to think about it, or you do have them close to you and you name them and you kind of love them, but then you send them off to market. And there's a lot of farmers that are, if they knew of an alternative, they would take the alternative. And I know Renee King is helping farmers make that transition. And I'm just thinking about there could be a lot of healing opportunity around people who are awakening, like you did from your poultry farm that you grew up on, that are awakening to, I've done all this to tens or hundreds of thousands of animals, and I feel the grief of that. I mean, it's welling up in my heart, and I don't know what to do with that. And they could easily turn to the bottle if they're not there now, or drugs, or whatever, or just not make the change, or hate themselves, self-loathing, whatever. I just see a lot of opportunity to minister to people who are awakening in that way. That maybe an animal chaplain would be the right key to fit that.
Yes, and that is something that I would also be very interested in. So, yeah, I would be happy to work with anybody who's dealing with that.
Yeah, and you've been there, so you would be the perfect person to wake up
Well,
to that.
yeah, because I still sometimes, if I think back, I can still, in my mind's eye, see the the chicks and turkeys suffering, and I can still smell the burning flesh, and it's something I'll live with for the rest of my life. But I want to help, so I do understand. Yeah, I understand the pain.
Yeah,
Uh,
and all of us have lived with something, I mean, unless we're like born innocent and stayed innocent, and didn't succumb to any of the normalized violence that our culture says is okay. We've all participated in normalized violence in some way. And I think it's one of the things that keeps us asleep. We don't want to see, we don't want to know. And if we do know, then what does that mean about me? And I kind of lose my bearings. So we've all been in this place where it's like, I've participated in this. We all have some kind of grief around it. And that's that. You can't change that, but you can change who you are going forward. And you can I do believe you can be in prayer for beings in the past. I do believe you can do that. And I do believe that we can also love ourselves, knowing that, I think in the Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz, the fourth one, I think we're all doing our best. It may not look like that, but at the time you were doing your best with what you knew. I was doing my best with what I knew. And then when we knew something different, we did better, or we did differently. It may have taken 20 years to make those decisions or those changes, but at least we have. And just really, I just want to welcome anyone to be on this process, because it's, like I said in your introduction, the spiritual path, self-discovery, and the spiritual journey is accompanied with pain, courage, and dark nights of the soul. It really is. You can't be on it without pain, courage, and dark nights of the soul. But on the other side of it is a bright life.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's hard to feel those feelings. It's hard to face them, but once you can, once you get through it, it's so much, but life is so much better.
Yeah. Before we start to close, I was wondering if I should have done this in the very beginning. Like, how do you define veganism? Because I was interviewed recently for a podcast, and she says, "Oh, you're talking about the vegan diet." And I said, "No, it's not a vegan diet. It's something else." So I'm interested in, like, how do you define what being a vegan is?
Um, I define it as avoiding exploitation of animals in as much as possible. So it's definitely much more than a diet. That's a big part of it, because that's the one thing that we do 2 or 3 times a day. But it also involves, not wearing, well, as I talked about the fur, not wearing products of animal exploitation, not participating in forms of entertainment like circuses or zoos or certainly rodeos. Anything that exploits an animal, I try as best as I can to avoid. It's not possible to be perfectly vegan because it's not a perfect world, but I try and do the best that I can.
Well, and the product labels too. I forget about that too, but the products that where animal testing is used, and kind of want to add that.
Right. Yes, definitely. The animal research and even, the charities that I donate to, I select charities that do not use animal testing or animal research. So, there's a lot of, sadly, there are a lot of things to be mindful of when you're looking to avoid animal exploitation.
Yeah, and really, I think, again, this is a spiritual path. We're talking about avoiding exploitation of everyone. We're not saying, oh, it's okay to exploit people, but not animals, or animals, but not people. This is about freedom for everyone, and eliminating slavery for everyone, eliminating exploitation for everyone. It is the golden rule of golden rules. We just include everyone, not just a subset of creation, which is humanity.
But
So,
definitely, it's important to be kind to people as well.
right. Yeah, the mean vegans, they're very, very tough activists out there, that they're projecting their own inner pain onto humans, and it's understandable if they see humans doing horrible things to animals, but that doesn't help. That doesn't help us become more peaceful people. And I think one of the things that's interesting about your bio is I think it says something about how you're like a pacifist activist or something like that. That you're one of those activists that very much values the Mennonite pacifism, and so there's a whole different energy to that.
Yeah, I have done a share of protesting, but as far as being, but most of my activism is more involved with education and vegan potlucks, which are starting up again. I'm so excited. As a matter of fact, tonight we have our first one since COVID. So
I do think